Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, could be articles, research, sometimes just our own notes, and we dig in.
The idea is to pull out the key stuff, the important takeaways, the things that make you go, aha, so you feel up to speed without getting lost in all the detail.
We sort of act as your guides through it all. Try and find the core insights, make it engaging.
Exactly.
And for this deep dive, we're tackling a pretty significant topic. It's Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation.
Mm-hmm.
Our source material today is mainly coming from excerpts of a transcript. It's from a YouTube video that really lays out the book's main arguments.
So our mission today is, to unpack Haidt's case. He argues pretty strongly that the digital world, thanks smartphones, social media, has really fundamentally changed childhood.
And he connects it directly to this mental health crisis we're seeing in young people. A major driver, he suggests.
He really does.
And the book kicks off with this metaphor. It's really powerful, actually. Haidt asks you to imagine sending your kid, your child, to go live on Mars.
It's quite the image, isn't it? Really makes you stop and think. Mars, an alien environment.
Totally alien.
Low gravity would physically change a developing body. Then there's the radiation exposure, right? Cosmic rays, huge risks, things we don't fully understand.
And the point he makes is no parent would do that. Not without, absolute guarantees of safety. Not without tons of research first.
Of course not. You wouldn't just send them off.
And Haidt's argument, essentially, is that plugging kids into smartphones and social media so young, so intensely, without really understanding the long-term effects, it's kind of like sending them to that uncharted territory.
That alien environment.
Yeah. It's reshaping childhood in ways we're only just beginning to grasp. And the potential dangers, he's arguing, could be just as serious as, Martian radiation. It definitely reframes how you look at something we now see as totally normal.
It really does. And Haidt connects this shift, this new environment, directly to what he labels the surge of suffering.
Okay, so let's talk about that surge. This is where the data comes in, according to the source.
Yeah.
And it's concerning.
It is. He points to the early 2010s. Around then, you start seeing this very clear, very alarming spike. Anxiety, depression, self-harm rates among adolescents, they just shoot up.
Right, unprecedented levels. And it wasn't like a gradual thing that just continued previous trends.
No, that's the key point the source emphasizes. The data shows a sharp increase, specifically kicking off around 2010, 2011, 2012. For some issues, particularly affecting girls, the rates apparently nearly tripled in just a handful of years.
Tripled? Wow. Yeah, that's a dramatic shift. And the book notes this surge was mainly in what they call internalizing disorders.
Right, so anxiety, depression, that feeling of hopelessness, maybe withdrawing socially, not so much externalizing stuff like acting out or breaking rules. Those didn't show the same sudden jump.
Okay, and the source mentioned some examples, right, to kind of illustrate these numbers.
Yeah, it touches on anecdotes like a girl, Emily, 14, whose distress and self-harm seemed really tied into social media pressures. Or a boy, James, whose mood just tanked while spending hours gaming online, especially during lockdowns later on.
So individual stories, but they seem to echo that bigger statistical trend Haidt is pointing to from the early 2010s.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this surge of suffering starting then. What does Haidt pinpoint as the main cause? This leads to his idea of the Great Rewiring, right?
Yes, this is absolutely central. He puts this Great Rewiring, as he calls it, roughly between 2010 and 2015, that 5-year window.
And why then? What was happening?
Well, that's when smartphones really went mainstream for teenagers. They stopped being just for adults or, a few kids. They became common, ubiquitous, really.
So they shifted from just being phones to being constant internet portals in their pockets.
Precisely. And the source highlights this is exactly when platforms like Instagram and Snapchat just exploded among teens. They became the way to socialize.
Right. And by 2016 or so?
Yeah. The source notes by 2016, almost 80% of teenagers had a smartphone. And loads of them were spending hours a day on social media already.
So it wasn't just a new gadget.
Yeah.
It fundamentally changed their world, their interactions, how they spent their time.
It really did. Haidt frames it as a clear shift from, let's say, a primarily play-based childhood.
Bikes, hanging out, that kind of thing.
Yeah, to a phone-based one.
And he argues this big digital shift didn't happen alone. It overlapped with and maybe even fueled another trend.
Yes, exactly. The decline of, physical, face-to-face, unstructured play, just kids playing, basically. And at the same time, a rise in what people call helicopter parenting, overprotection.
Okay, let's unpack the play part first. Why is just, messing about outside or playing games with friends so important, especially the stuff that's a bit risky?
Well, Haidt makes a strong case, and the source echoes this, that things like climbing a tree or figuring out the rules of a game without adults stepping in, or even just dealing with a scraped knee or a small argument, those are fundamental for building resilience, for creativity, for learning social skills, gaining confidence.
It's about learning to handle a little bit of fear, right?
Yeah.
Figuring out risks for yourself, dealing with things not going perfectly.
Exactly. Bouncing back from small setbacks in a pretty safe context. And Haidt argues that overprotection, which is often driven by fears that are, statistically speaking, kind of inflated, like stranger danger.
Right, you hear about that.
It actually limits kids' independence. It stops them from developing those coping skills. And ironically, he suggests that can make them more anxious later when they face real challenges because they haven't built up that internal toolkit.
So trying too hard to keep them safe from tiny risks actually makes them less equipped for bigger ones down the line.
That's the argument. You inadvertently deny them the experiences they need to build that emotional strength, that self-reliance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which leads us right into the core of the book's argument, really. The 4 foundational harms he identifies from this phone-based childhood, this is where he gets specific about the damage.
Yeah, let's break these down. The first one is social deprivation.
Which sounds weird, right? Because social media is supposed to be social, connecting people.
It does seem counterintuitive. But Haidt's point, highlighted in the source, is that for teens especially, these online interactions, even if there are hundreds of them, often leave them feeling more isolated, more lonely.
Why? Because they're shallow.
Kind of. They lack the depth, the nonverbal cues, body language, tone of voice, the real empathy you get face-to-face. The source mentions an example, Sarah, who felt really alone despite tons of online friends and likes.
Right, so the quantity isn't the same as the quality needed for, healthy development.
That seems to be the argument. Okay, second harm, sleep deprivation.
This one feels pretty obvious, doesn't it?
It almost seems self-evident. Constant pings, scrolling late into the night, getting sucked into games. It just messes up sleep. Plus, the blue light from screens we know that suppresses melatonin.
Which you need to regulate sleep. And bad sleep, especially for teenagers whose brains are still developing. That's just bad news all around.
Absolutely. It hits mood, thinking, memory, focus, stress levels. Not to mention physical health. The source gives an example, Alex, whose grades dropped and mood soured, and it was directly linked to staying up super late gaming.
Makes sense. Okay, what's the third harm?
Attention fragmentation. This is about how the apps themselves are designed.
Engineered, even.
Engineered is a good word. With constant notifications, infinite scrolling feeds, little dopamine hits. They're built to grab and hold your attention, but in short bursts.
Right. Always pulling you away.
And Haidt argues this constant switching trains the adolescent brain away from sustained concentration. It makes deep work, complex thought, even just reading a book for a while, much, much harder.
So it's not just annoying, it's potentially reshaping how their brains work, making focus more difficult long term.
That's the concern. The source mentions Emily again struggling with homework because her phone kept interrupting her focus. It directly impacts learning, cognitive development.
Okay. And the 4th foundational harm?
Addiction. Plain and simple. The source explains these platforms use psychological tricks, like intermittent rewards, that unpredictable timing of likes, comments, new posts, which triggers dopamine release.
The brain's reward chemical.
Exactly. And developing teenage brains are known to be more susceptible to forming addictive pathways. So this design encourages compulsive checking, this constant need for validation online.
Likes, comments.
Yeah, and that fear of missing out. FOMO. Haidt argues these addictive loops prey on vulnerabilities and are a direct pipeline to anxiety and depression. The example of Jack feeling empty and anxious when the notifications stop, that really shows the addictive cycle.
Wow. Okay, so those are the 4 big harms. But the book also points out that it doesn't hit everyone the same way, right? There's a gendered aspect.
Yes, that's a really important layer, he adds, a gendered impact. While both boys and girls are negatively affected, the way they're affected, the specific pressures, often look different.
How so? What does the source say about girls?
For girls, the emphasis, particularly on platforms like Instagram, often falls heavily on appearance. self-presentation, and constant comparison, comparing themselves to these curated, often highly unrealistic, idealized images.
Right. Filters, perfect lives.
Exactly. And the book argues this directly fuels major issues with body image, crushes self-esteem, and makes them really vulnerable to cyberbullying and social aggression, which can be brutal online. The source uses Lily as an example, constantly measuring herself against influencers. You can see the pressure.
Okay. And for boys, is it different?
It often is, yeah. While boys certainly face comparison too, the source suggests their main draw might be more towards gaming communities, maybe certain kinds of YouTube content, other online spaces.
So different platforms, different activities.
Potentially. And while gaming can be social, excessive gaming can lead to its own kind of addiction, pulling them away from real-world friends, family. Plus, there are concerns raised about the kind of content they might encounter: aggression, misogyny, maybe even pornography in some online corners. Mike is mentioned, whose gaming habits hurt his school and real-life social connections.
So different paths, maybe. Girls focus more on visual comparison, boys maybe more on gaming or certain content. But the end result often looks similar.
That's what Haidt seems to argue. Similar negative outcomes. More anxiety, more depression, feeling isolated, development getting stalled or warped, for both boys and girls.
Okay, that's quite a picture of the problem. So given all that, what does the book say we should do about it? What are the solutions?
Well, the source is clear that Haidt doesn't think there's one magic bullet. No single group can fix this. It needs a collective effort, a multifaceted approach.
Right. Involving who?
Pretty much everyone. Parents, schools, governments, and, importantly, the tech companies themselves.
Okay. What about parents? What's their role?
For parents, it's about, taking back some control in the home environment, setting clear boundaries around phone use, when, where, how long, actively encouraging real-world stuff, play, sports, hobbies, just hanging out face-to-face.
And fostering resilience, like we talked about earlier.
Yes, allowing appropriate independence. And crucially, keeping lines of communication open, talking honestly with kids about what they're doing and seeing online.
Makes sense. And schools.
Schools have a huge role. The source mentions ideas like limiting or banning phone use during the school day to help with focus and encourage actual social interaction, making sure there's time and space for physical activity, maybe unstructured play, and integrating serious mental health education and support right into the curriculum.
So creating a different kind of environment during school hours.
Exactly. And then there's the bigger picture, governments and tech companies.
What does Haidt want from them?
He argues for real regulations, things like much stricter age verification, maybe needing a parent or guardian involved for sign-up, not just clicking a button saying you're 13.
Yeah.
And design standards, making platforms prioritize kids' safety and well-being over just maximizing engagement time and addiction potential, more transparency about how algorithms work. And fundamentally, tech companies taking some responsibility for the impact their products have.
So a real shift in priorities for them.
A major one. The overall message coming through the source material is really about consciously deciding to reclaim childhood from this digital dominance. It means understanding these deep impacts we've discussed.
Social, sleep, attention, addiction.
And then taking deliberate steps together, from choices in our own families all the way up to policy changes. The goal is a healthier, more balanced environment for kids to actually grow up in.
It's like acknowledging this phone-based childhood kind of just happened. It wasn't deliberately designed for healthy development.
Right, and its rapid spread has had these significant downsides that we now need to consciously address. It's not about hating technology, but about managing it wisely, especially for kids. Course correcting.
Protecting the next generation, essentially.
That's the core of it.
Okay. Well, that brings us towards the end of this deep dive into Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation, based on our source material. The central argument is stark. The digital world has profoundly changed childhood. It's a major factor in the youth mental health crisis, and fixing it requires more than just individual effort. It needs a cultural shift.
Yeah, that phrase he uses, bringing childhood back to earth, it's powerful. It's a call to really prioritize the fundamental needs of kids. Real play, decent sleep, actual face-to-face connection, the ability to focus over the demands of the digital world, which are often designed to be addictive.
It's a challenge to how we live now. So here's something to maybe turn over in your mind as you go about your day, drawing from the source. The book argues for big societal changes, absolutely. But thinking smaller scale right now. What's one concrete step, however small, that you could take, maybe in your own life or your family or even your local community, to nurture a bit more real-world connection, a bit more room for play, for building resilience, a bit less digital distraction for the young people around you?
It's a really important question, definitely worth some serious thought and maybe some action too.